voice beneath Blackwater Lake.
The town of Blackwater sat in the shadow of a lake that nobody trusted. It wasn't because people drowned there often. In fact, there had only been 2 recorded drownings in the last 50 years. It wasn't because the water was polluted either. Tests showed it was cleaner than most lakes in the province. No, people feared Blackwater Lake because of the sounds. Every few months, usually late at night, residents living near the shoreline reported hearing voices coming from the water. The stories varied. Some heard crying, others heard laughter. A few claimed they heard their own names whispered from the darkness. Most dismissed it as imagination. Wind moving through reeds, animal calls, echoes. But nobody ever stayed near the lake long enough to investigate, especially after sunset. I learned all of this from my grandfather. He had lived in Blackwater his entire life. When I was a child, he would sit on his porch with a cup of tea and stare toward the distant lake. Sometimes he would remain silent for hours. One evening when I was 14, I asked him why. His expression changed instantly. For a moment, genuine fear crossed his face. Then he looked directly at me. "Promise me something." "What?" "If you ever hear somebody calling your name from that lake." He paused. "Don't answer." I laughed. He didn't. Years later, after graduating college, I returned to Blackwater to help clear out my grandfather's house after he passed away. The old place sat at the edge of town. Dust coated everything. Photographs lined the walls. Fishing trophies hung above the fireplace. Most people would have felt sadness. Instead, I felt something else. Curiosity. Because among his belongings, I found a locked metal box hidden beneath the floorboards of his bedroom. Inside were newspaper clippings. Dozens of them. Every article involved Blackwater Lake. Missing people. Strange sightings. Unexplained sounds. One clipping stood out. A faded article dated October 1974. Local teenager disappears during night fishing trip. The body was never recovered. Attached to the clipping was a handwritten note in my grandfather's writing. He answered the voice. I stared at those words for several seconds. Then I found another clipping. Then another. Each one involved someone missing near the lake. And beside each article, written in the same shaky handwriting, he answered. He answered. He answered. The final clipping was different. No newspaper article. Just a photograph. 5 young men standing beside the lake. All smiling. All holding fishing gear. On the back was written, Summer 1978. The last trip. I recognized one of the faces immediately. My grandfather. The other 4 men were strangers, until I noticed something. Someone had crossed out 4 of the 5 faces using a black marker. Only my grandfather remained untouched. Below the image he had written, I'm the only one left. That night I couldn't sleep. Questions kept circling through my mind. What voice? Who answered? What happened to the others? Around midnight, I grabbed a flashlight and drove toward the lake. The road was empty. Trees crowded both sides. The deeper I traveled, the darker the world became. Eventually I reached the shoreline. Moonlight reflected off perfectly still water. No waves, no wind, no movement whatsoever. The silence felt wrong, almost artificial, like the entire area was holding its breath. I stepped from the car. The air smelled damp, ancient. The beam from my flashlight stretched across the shoreline. Nothing. Just rocks and reeds. For several minutes I stood there listening, feeling increasingly foolish. Then I heard it. A voice. Far sailed across the water. So faint I almost convinced myself I imagined it. I froze. The voice came again. A woman. Crying. The sound drifted over the surface of the lake. My stomach tightened. Every instinct told me to leave. Instead, I walked closer. The crying continued. Not loud, Not dramatic, just quiet, heartbreaking sobs. The kind that made you want to help. The kind that made you want to find whoever was hurting. I reached the edge of the water. The crying stopped instantly. Silence returned. I scanned the darkness. Nothing. Then a voice whispered my name. Daniel. Every muscle in my body locked. The voice sounded familiar. Terrifyingly familiar. I knew that voice. It belonged to my mother. The problem was my mother had been dead for 7 years, and the whisper wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from the middle of the lake. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. The voice was unmistakable. It was my mother. Not similar, not close. Exactly her. The same softness, the same tone, the same way she pronounced my name. Daniel. The whisper drifted across the black water. My flashlight trembled in my hand. Logic immediately fought against panic. My mother was dead. She had died in a car accident 7 years ago. I attended the funeral. I helped carry the coffin. I watched it disappear beneath the earth. Yet somehow I was hearing her voice. A cold sensation crawled up my spine. Then the voice came again. Daniel, help me. Something moved beneath the water, far from shore. A ripple, then another. Slow circles spreading across the moonlit surface. I took an involuntary step forward. The voice sounded terrified, desperate, human. Every instinct inside me wanted to help. Then I remembered my grandfather. If you ever hear somebody calling your name from that lake, don't answer. My heart pounded. I backed away. Immediately the voice changed. The sadness vanished. Daniel. This time it sounded irritated, almost angry. I continued backing toward my car. The ripples stopped. The water became perfectly still. Then the whisper became a scream. Come back! The sound exploded across the lake. I nearly dropped my flashlight. The voice no longer sounded like my mother. It sounded wrong, as if dozens of voices were speaking at once. Male, female, young, old, all layered together. I ran. The moment I reached my car, I jumped inside and locked the doors. The screaming stopped. Silence returned. My breathing filled the vehicle. For nearly a minute, I sat frozen. Then something caught my attention. Movement near the shoreline. A figure stood exactly where I had been moments earlier, watching me. Moonlight reflected off the water behind it. The person appeared unusually tall, thin, motionless. I couldn't make out facial features, only a dark silhouette. I turned the key and sped away. The entire drive home I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that figure standing in the road behind me. But nothing followed. At least not that I could see. The next morning I visited the town library. Blackwater wasn't large. Most people knew each other. The librarian, Mrs. Collins, recognized me immediately. Daniel, you're Harold's grandson. I nodded. Her smile faded. Sorry about your grandfather. Thank you. I hesitated, then asked the question. What happened at Blackwater Lake? The reaction was immediate. She looked around to make sure nobody else was nearby, then lowered her voice. Why would you ask that? My grandfather kept records. Mrs. Collins sighed. I should have guessed. She disappeared into a back room. A few minutes later, she returned carrying a thick binder. Dust covered the spine. These aren't official records. What are they? Things the town prefers to forget. She placed the binder on the table. Inside were newspaper articles, witness statements, police reports, and handwritten notes. Most described disappearances. Others described strange encounters. A fisherman hearing his dead brother calling from the water. A woman seeing children walking beneath the lake's surface. Campers reporting voices outside their tents, despite nobody being there. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. A photograph from 1978, the same year as the picture from my grandfather's box. 5 young men stood beside a boat, my grandfather and his friends. The caption beneath the image read, "Local fishing group prepares for annual night trip." The next page contained another article, 4 men missing. Search continues. Only one survivor, Harold Bennett, my grandfather. I looked up. "What happened to them?" Mrs. Collins stared out the window. "No one knows." "Did my grandfather ever talk about it?" "He talked plenty. And nobody believed him." A chill spread through me. "What did he say happened?" Mrs. Collins hesitated, then answered. "He claimed something in the lake called to them." The room suddenly felt colder. "He said one of his friends heard his dead father speaking." I remained silent. "He walked into the water," Mrs. Collins continued. "Then another heard his wife. Then another. And another." She swallowed. "Your grandfather said they weren't drowning." "What do you mean?" "He said they walked willingly." I remembered the voice from the previous night. The way it sounded exactly like my mother. The way it begged for help. Then demanded I return. "What happened to the bodies?" I asked. Mrs. Collins slowly shook her head. "They were never found." The binder suddenly seemed much heavier. As I continued reading, a folded piece of paper slipped from between 2 pages. Handwriting covered both sides. I immediately recognized it. My grandfather's. The note read, "If you're reading this, then you've heard it too." I stopped breathing. The rest of the page continued. "The voice knows who you miss. It knows what hurts. It knows what guilt you carry. Do not listen. Do not answer. Do not go onto the lake after dark. If it learns your name, it won't stop." At the bottom was a final sentence. One written so hard the pen nearly tore through the paper. It followed me home. I stared at those words. Then a terrible realization struck me. The previous night, the voice hadn't simply called my name. It already knew it. And if my grandfather was right, that meant it had already noticed me. That evening I returned to his house. For the first time since arriving in Blackwater, I locked every door, every window, every curtain. Darkness settled outside. The town became silent. At exactly 11:47 p.m., a single knock echoed through the house. 3 sharp taps. From the front door. I froze. Another knock followed. Then another. Slow. Patient. I looked through the peephole. Nobody was there. The porch was empty. The yard was empty. The street was empty. Then I heard a whisper. Not outside. Inside the house. Directly behind me. "Daniel!" I spun around. The hallway was empty, but muddy footprints now stretched across the floor, leading deeper into the darkness of the house. And they looked as though they had come from the lake. For several seconds, I simply stared. The muddy footprints glistened under the hallway light. Water dripped from them. Tiny droplets splashed onto the hardwood floor. The trail stretched away from the front entrance and disappeared into the darkness near the back of the house. I felt my pulse hammering in my throat. There was no logical explanation. The doors had been locked. The windows had been locked. Nobody should have been inside. Yet the footprints were there. Fresh. Wet. Real. A floorboard creaked somewhere deeper in the house. The sound nearly made me jump out of my skin. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, an old fireplace poker. Then I slowly followed the footprints. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to get in my car and drive until Blackwater was nothing more than a distant memory. Instead, I moved deeper into the house. The footprints led toward my grandfather's bedroom, the same room where I had discovered the metal box. The hallway seemed longer than I remembered. Each step echoed. Each shadow appeared to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. Then I noticed something strange. The footprints weren't human, at least not entirely. The shape resembled a bare foot, but the toes were far too long, thin, almost finger-like. A sick feeling settled into my stomach. I continued forward. The bedroom door stood partially open. A faint yellow light spilled through the crack. I was certain I had turned that lamp off earlier. Slowly, I pushed the door wider. The room was empty. At first, then I looked toward the far corner. Someone sat in my grandfather's chair. My heart stopped. The figure faced away from me, motionless. A dark silhouette illuminated by the lamp beside it. Water pooled beneath the chair, dripping steadily onto the floor. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then the chair began to rotate. Slowly. Very slowly. Turning toward me. I raised the fireplace poker. The figure continued rotating. The movement wasn't natural. It looked more like a mannequin being twisted by invisible hands. Then the face came into view. I nearly screamed. It was my grandfather. Or at least it looked like him. The eyes were wrong. Completely black. The skin was pale and swollen. Water streamed from his hair. His mouth hung slightly open, as though something inside was forcing it wider. The thing smiled. "Daniel!" My grandfather's voice emerged from its lips. I backed toward the doorway. The thing remained seated, smiling, watching. Then it spoke again. "You should have stayed away." The voice wasn't quite right. The words sounded rehearsed, like an actor imitating someone they had never met. I tightened my grip on the poker. "What are you?" The smile widened. Too wide, far wider than any human mouth should. The skin around its cheeks began to split. Tiny cracks appeared. Dark water leaked from them. Then, all at once, the thing stood. Its body unfolded upward. Higher! Higher! Much taller than my grandfather had ever been. Bones cracked, joints popped. Its head struck the ceiling. The smile never faded. I ran. The poker fell from my hand as I sprinted through the hallway. Behind me came the sound of wet footsteps. Fast. Much faster than anything that size should have moved. I reached the front door, unlocked it, burst outside. Cold night air slammed into my face. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. The moment I looked back, the house was dark, silent, empty. No figure stood in the doorway. No movement appeared behind the windows. Nothing. As though the entire encounter had never happened. I drove directly to the only person who might understand. Mrs. Collins. The librarian answered after several minutes of knocking. She looked irritated until she saw my expression. Then, she immediately invited me inside. I told her everything. The footprints. The voice. The thing wearing my grandfather's face. By the time I finished, she looked terrified. Not surprised. Terrified. Harold always said it could imitate people. I stared at her. What exactly is it? She slowly shook her head. Nobody knows. There must be something. There are stories. What kind of stories? The old woman walked to a bookshelf. From behind it, she removed a thin leather journal. The cover appeared centuries old. This belonged to one of the town's founders. I opened it carefully. Most pages had faded, but several passages remained readable. One entry dated over 100 years earlier caught my attention. The lake speaks. Tonight it used my brother's voice. Thomas followed it into the water. We searched until dawn. Only his footprints returned. A chill spread through me. I continued reading. Another entry. Then another. All describing the same thing. Voices. Disappearances. People returning changed. One passage had been underlined repeatedly. It does not live within the lake. The lake is its doorway. I looked up. What does that mean? Mrs. Collins swallowed. No one knows. Before I could respond, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness. Both of us froze. Outside, wind suddenly howled through the trees. The lights from neighboring homes vanished as well. The entire street was black. Then came the sound. A voice floating through the darkness outside. Soft, distant, calling someone's name. Not mine. Mrs. Collins. Her face instantly lost all color. The voice came again, this time louder, using the voice of her husband, a man who had died nearly 20 years ago. Tears filled her eyes. For a moment, she actually started toward the front door. Then she stopped herself. The voice outside began laughing, a low, wet chuckle, followed by dozens of others. Male voices, female voices, children's voices, hundreds of them, all laughing together. The window started rattling. The front door shook in its frame. Something was outside. Something large. Something that had come all the way from Blackwater Lake. And for the first time, I realized a horrifying truth. It wasn't waiting for us to return to the water. It was hunting us now. The front door shook again. Harder this time. A loud bang echoed through Mrs. Collins' house. The old woman gasped. Outside, the voices continued laughing. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. All overlapping. All wrong. The sound reminded me of recordings being played backward and forward at the same time. Human. But not human. Another impact rattled the windows. Something had struck the side of the house. I peered through the curtains. At first, I couldn't see anything. The street was completely dark. The power outage had swallowed every source of light. Then lightning flashed in the distance. For a split second, the neighborhood illuminated. And I saw it, standing across the road, watching the house. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. The figure was enormous, at least 10 feet tall. Its body appeared unnaturally thin. Arms dangled nearly to the ground. Its skin glistened as though permanently wet. And where its face should have been, there were faces, dozens of them, human faces, half submerged beneath translucent skin, twisting, moving, mouths opening and closing, whispering silently. Then darkness returned. The image remained burned into my memory. "What was that?" I whispered. Mrs. Collins didn't answer. She was staring at the journal, flipping through pages with trembling hands. Finally, she found something. A folded map, ancient and yellowed with age. "This is older than the town." She spread it across the table. The map showed Blackwater Lake, but the shoreline was different, much larger, more irregular. Near the center was a symbol resembling an eye. Beneath it, someone had written, "The Deep Door." A knot formed in my stomach. "What does that mean?" Mrs. Collins pointed to another note. A paragraph written in faded ink. "The thing below wears the voices of the dead. It feeds on grief. It grows stronger when remembered. It cannot create voices, only steal them." I immediately thought of my mother, of my grandfather, of everyone the creature had imitated. "It isn't bringing them back," I said quietly. Mrs. Collins nodded. "No. It's using them." Outside, another thunderous impact struck the house. The front window cracked. The laughter stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. Then a single voice spoke, loud enough to hear clearly. "Daniel!" My blood froze. It was my grandfather again, perfectly accurate. Every detail, every inflection. "Daniel, listen to me." Mrs. Collins grabbed my arm. "Don't answer." The voice continued. "You're running out of time." I stared at the front door. Part of me knew it wasn't real. Part of me knew it was a trap. Yet another part desperately wanted to believe. Wanted to hear him again. Wanted answers. The voice lowered. "You need to find the boat." A chill shot through me. The boat. The one from the photograph. The annual fishing trip. Find the boat before the next moonrise. Mrs. Collins looked horrified. It's lying. Maybe. But what if it isn't? Neither of us spoke. The voice outside laughed softly, as though it knew exactly what I was thinking. Then footsteps moved away from the house. Heavy, wet, slowly disappearing into the darkness. A few moments later, the power returned. Lights flickered on throughout the neighborhood. Everything appeared normal. No sign of the creature. No sign of footprints. No sign anything had happened. Except for the cracked window and the fear lingering in the room. The next morning we visited the town archives. Most of the records were stored beneath the old courthouse. Boxes lined the walls. Dust coated everything. Hours passed as we searched. Finally, just before noon, we found a file from 1978. Inside were photographs taken after the disappearance of my grandfather's friends. Most showed search crews, boats, divers, volunteers. Then one image stopped me cold. A partially submerged rowboat, wedged among reeds. The photograph had been taken 3 days after the men vanished. Only one thing remained inside: a notebook. The evidence report stated the notebook had never been returned to the family. I searched the file further. Eventually I found it. A water-damaged journal sealed inside an evidence bag. The final entries belonged to one of my grandfather's missing friends. The handwriting became increasingly frantic as the pages continued. July 18th. We heard voices tonight. Tom says he heard his father. Harold thinks we're imagining things. July 19th. The voices returned. Closer. July 20th. The lake isn't empty. Something watches us from below. July 21st. Tom walked into the water. We couldn't stop him. The final page had been written only hours before the others vanished. The words barely remained legible. It's not calling from the lake. It's calling from underneath it. Below the final sentence was a rough sketch. I stared at it for several seconds, then felt my stomach drop. The drawing showed a circular hole deep beneath the water, far larger than the lake itself, and rising from that darkness, a mass of faces, thousands of them, all connected to a single enormous body. At the bottom of the page, the writer had scrawled one final warning. Do not let it learn your regret. I remembered the voice of my mother, the guilt I'd carried for years, the things I wished I'd said before she died. The creature hadn't chosen her randomly. It had reached into my memories, found the wound that hurt most, and used it. Then I noticed something else inside the evidence bag. A folded piece of paper, separate from the journal. A note written by my grandfather, addressed directly to me. The date at the top was only 3 months before his death. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The first sentence nearly stopped my heart. Daniel, if you're reading this, then it finally knows who you are, and that means I failed. I stared at my grandfather's letter while the courthouse basement seemed to grow colder around me. Mrs. Collins watched silently from across the table. My hands trembled as I continued reading. I hoped keeping you away from Blackwater would protect you. It worked for a while. But the thing beneath the lake does not forget bloodlines, especially mine. A pulse of fear moved through me. I read on. I need you to understand what happened in 1978. Not the story the town tells, the truth. The letter shifted into a first-person account. We were idiots. Tom, Eli, Marcus, Owen, and me. 5 young men who thought ghost stories were funny. Every summer we took the same boat onto Blackwater Lake at night. We drank beer, fished badly, and mocked the old stories. Then Tom heard his father's voice. His father had died 6 months earlier. At first we thought he was joking, but Tom kept staring into the water. He said his father was calling from below, asking for help. By the third night, all of us heard voices, different ones. Eli heard his wife. Marcus heard his younger sister. Owen heard his dead son. I heard my mother. I swallowed hard. The pattern was identical. Tom was the first to answer. He stood up in the boat and spoke into the darkness. The water around us began to move. Not waves. Something beneath the surface was circling us. Then Tom climbed over the side. We tried to stop him. He fought like a man possessed. He walked into the lake as though descending invisible stairs. He never resurfaced. The basement felt oppressively silent except for my breathing. After Tom vanished, the voices grew louder. Eli lasted an hour. Marcus lasted 2. Owen lasted until dawn. Each time the water opened for them. Each time they walked willingly into the darkness below. I was the last one left, and I would have followed them. Except Owen gave me something before he died. I leaned closer to the page. A rusted iron pendant. He said his grandmother claimed it protected against the thing under the water. I thought it was nonsense. Until the voices stopped the moment I put it on. The lake became silent. Not normal silence. Angry silence. Not hitting, pressing. As if testing how thin the barrier really was. The voices multiplied. Now my grandfather. Now others I didn't recognize. Dozens became hundreds. A choir of imitation, all speaking at once. All saying my name. Father Brennan finally moved. Run! It was the only word he said before the wall beside us split. Not shattered. Split. Like wood deciding it no longer wanted to exist as wood. A thin vertical crack opened and black water seeped through. But it wasn't water. It moved too deliberately. Too aware. It flowed upward along the inside of the cabin walls, defying gravity. And inside it, faces, not fully formed, not fully separate, just impressions of people. Mouths opening in silent screams. Eyes blinking out of sync, watching me, recognizing me. Mrs. Collins screamed. Father Brennan shoved me toward the back door. Go now! The pendant pulsed violently in my hand. Each pulse matched a whisper. Each whisper was a name I had once loved. I ran. The back door burst open into freezing night air. The forest outside was wrong. Too quiet. Even the wind felt like it was holding its breath. Behind me, the cabin groaned, then collapsed inward like something had inhaled it. And then the forest answered. Daniel! My mother's voice again. Closer. No direction. Everywhere. I clutched the pendant and forced myself forward. Branches whipped at my face. The ground felt uneven, shifting slightly under my steps, like I wasn't running on land anymore. But something softer. Something alive. The lake appeared suddenly between the trees. Blackwater Lake. Still. Perfectly still. No reflection of the sky. No stars. Just a flat black surface that looked less like water and more like an opening. A wound in the world. And waiting beside it. A boat. The same one from the photograph. Old. Rotting. Still floating. As if it had been waiting decades for me specifically. A voice came from the water. Not loud, not soft. Certain. Come closer. The surface rippled, and the ripples formed words. Come down! The pendant went completely silent. No burning, no cold, just absence, as if whatever power it had just been turned off. That's when I understood. It wasn't protection. It was attention. A beacon. The boat rocked gently as I stepped into it. Every instinct screamed not to, but I was already being pulled in every direction at once. My mother's voice, my grandfather's voice, everyone I had ever lost, all speaking at once now. Not from outside, from inside my head. Lake began to rise. Not physically, but visually. The surface lifted like a curtain being drawn upward, and underneath it was not water. It was space, infinite dark depth stretching downward without end. And at the center, a shape, too large to understand directly. So my mind translated it into something I could survive seeing. A doorway, a circular opening, the deep door, and around it, they were there, thousands of faces, all drifting in the darkness, all speaking softly, all using voices I knew. Daniel. The boat drifted forward on its own. I didn't row. I couldn't. Something was guiding it, or pulling it, or welcoming it. Then I saw him, my grandfather. Not as a corpse, not as a monster, but as something paused, standing within the mass of faces, looking directly at me. For a moment, his expression broke through the emptiness. "Don't listen," he mouthed. And then the thing wearing him spoke through him, in perfect sync with every other voice. He never left. The faces surged. The water, if it still was water, rose around the boat like walls closing in. And the deep door began to open wider, not by force, by invitation, by memory, by grief, by everything I had ever refused to let go of. I understood then what the rule really meant. Do not let it learn your regret, because regret is a map, and it uses maps. The boat reached the edge of the door, and I saw what was beyond it. Not another world. Not death. Something worse. A place where voices are stored but never finished. A place where memories are peeled apart and worn like skin. A place that learns you until there is nothing left that is you. The final choice came quietly. Stay in the boat or step forward. My mother's voice softened. "Daniel, I'm here." My grandfather's voice followed. "We can fix it. All of them, all lying, all inviting." I closed my eyes. And for the first time since this began, I spoke back. No. The word didn't echo. It cut. The pendant shattered in my hand, a sharp crack like bone breaking. And for 1 second, silence. True silence. The boat stopped moving. The voices stopped speaking. Even the lake stopped pretending to be a lake. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I threw the broken pendant into the door, and I jumped after it. Everything disappeared. No water, no light, no sound. Just falling. Endless falling. And for the first time, no voices followed me. When I opened my eyes, I was back on shore. Morning light, birds, wind and trees. Blackwater Lake looked normal again. Just a lake, nothing more, nothing less. But I still hear it sometimes. Not calling my name, just remembering it. Like something far away is learning it again. And somewhere beneath the calm water, something is still listening, waiting for someone else to answer.
The end.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and leave a comment. Any respectful feedback or constructive criticism to help me improve future videos would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for your support.